Maybe it happened on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic. No screaming, no door slamming, no final confrontation where you delivered the perfect line. Just a quiet moment. You, sitting somewhere, phone in hand, reading a message back. And somewhere in the space between the words on the screen and the feeling in your chest, something clicked. Not clicked like a light bulb, more like the sound of a lock releasing. You had read that message 100 times before, or messages like it. The kind that are technically fine, the kind a stranger would read and say, "What's wrong with that?" But you weren't a stranger. You knew what was underneath it. You knew the temperature behind the words. And for the first time, instead of composing a long response to smooth it over, instead of reaching for the explanation that would fix the energy, instead of leaning back into your old habit of making the other person comfortable at the cost of your own clarity, you just set the phone down. And you sat with the silence. That moment, that one quiet moment, was the beginning of something people around you still haven't been able to name. They've noticed it. They just don't understand it. Some of them have called it coldness. Some have said you changed. One of them probably told someone else that you think you're better than everyone now. And the irony is, you're not thinking about any of them nearly as much as they're thinking about you. Because you found something in that silence. Not an answer. Not a plan. Something quieter than both of those. You found that you had been explaining yourself for so long, justifying your feelings, defending your perspective, earning the right to be understood, that you had forgotten the most important thing. You don't owe an explanation to every room you walk into. And the day you started to live that, not as a philosophy, not as a quote you saved on your phone, but as something you genuinely felt in your body, everything shifted. They don't recognize you anymore. Not because you became a stranger, because you finally became yourself. Let's go back, because you deserve to see it clearly now. There's a particular kind of person, and you've probably had more than one in your life, whose behavior only reveals itself over time, not in big moments, in small ones. The way they would change the subject right when you were getting to something real. Not obviously, just a pivot. Just a laugh at the wrong moment or a sudden question about something unrelated. Just enough to derail you without ever touching the conversation you actually needed to have. The way their voice shifted when someone else walked into the room, warmer, softer, more performative. And you would catch it, that half-second adjustment, and you would tell yourself you were imagining things. Because you wanted to believe the version of them that everyone else seemed to see. The way they were most generous right before they needed something. A kindness that had a shelf life. A sweetness with an expiration date you only discovered after you gave them what they were building toward. The way they labeled your perceptions. You felt something was off, and instead of sitting with your feeling, they handed you a new interpretation. You're overthinking it. That's not what happened. You're always so sensitive. And slowly, quietly, you began to outsource your own inner knowing. You started checking with them before trusting yourself. You started apologizing for feelings that were accurate. That is not a small thing. That is how someone else's version of reality gets installed in the place where yours used to live. And here is what is hard to admit. You didn't know it was happening. Not all the way. You had inklings, moments in the car on the way home when something didn't sit right. Moments in the bathroom at a gathering where you stood in front of the mirror and felt the weight of something you couldn't name. Moments in the middle of the night when a conversation replayed in your mind and the version of it you kept returning to was different from the one they described. You were not paranoid. You were paying attention with the part of yourself that doesn't lie. And slowly, it stopped feeling like one bad moment. It started looking like a pattern. They were kind when you were compliant. They became distant when you had a perspective that differed from theirs. They expressed concern about your choices in a tone that sounded supportive but felt like surveillance. They would tell your story to others, sometimes kindly, sometimes not, but always without asking permission, always shaped in a way that centered their role in it. They used your growth against you when it was convenient. They used your struggles against you when it served them. And when you finally named something out loud, something they had done, something that had cost you, they made the conversation about their intentions instead of your experience. You cannot change someone's intentions by explaining your pain loud enough. And somewhere in the exhaustion of trying, you began to understand that. The pattern wasn't that they were constantly cruel. It's more subtle than that. The pattern was that the relationship only had room for one person's reality. And for a very long time, you kept volunteering yours as the one to disappear. There is a version of you that they invented. It wasn't malicious necessarily, though sometimes it was. Sometimes it was simple convenience. If they could keep you in a box they understood, they didn't have to adjust to who you were actually becoming. So they gave you a label and repeated it until you started trying to disprove it. They called you too sensitive, not because your sensitivity was excessive, because it was accurate. You were reading energy that they were hoping no one would read. You were catching the thing underneath the thing. And it is much easier to call someone dramatic than to admit they saw something real. They called you difficult the first time you said no. The first time you asked for something to be different. The first time you stopped bending. Suddenly, the person who had been endlessly accommodating, who had given and rearranged themselves for years, became difficult. As if the only version of you that was easy to be around was the one that had no edges. They called you distant when you got quiet. But you weren't distant. You were discerning. There is a difference between pulling away because you're cold and pulling back because you finally understand that some conversations are not built to hold truth. You weren't abandoning the relationship. You were grieving the realization that the relationship had never quite been what you thought it was. They said you changed, and they meant it as an accusation. But change was the most honest thing that happened to you. The version of you they preferred was the version that stayed small, that circled back to apologize even when you were right, that filled silences with reassurances, that made sure everyone else in the room felt comfortable, even when you were quietly falling apart. The most painful part was not that they misunderstood you. The painful part was that for a while, sometimes a long while, you almost believed their version of you. You started wondering if you really were too much, too intense, too aware of things that other people seem to navigate without a second thought. You started softening your perception to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold your full self. You started explaining, endlessly, exhaustingly, trying to build a bridge between who you were and who they needed you to be. And those explanations cost you something. Every time you explained your feelings, instead of simply having them, you taught yourself that your inner experience required external approval before it was real. Every time you justified your boundaries instead of holding them, you communicated to yourself, not just to them, that your limits were negotiable. Every time you rewrote your story to make them more comfortable, you moved a little further away from the truth of what you had actually lived. You were not too much. You were placed in rooms too small for what you carry. You were not difficult. You were clear. And clarity is inconvenient to people who benefit from your confusion. You were not cold when you went quiet. You were finally listening to the part of yourself that had been talking for years, the part that knew, the part that had been trying to get your attention through every restless night and every moment in the car when something didn't add up. Here is what that label giving taught you, though, and this matters because nothing you walked through was wasted. It taught you the difference between a room that wants you to grow and a room that wants you to shrink and call it belonging. And once you know that difference, you cannot unknow it. Something changed in you. Not all at once. Not the way people describe transformations in movies, where there is a clear before and a clear after, a dramatic turning point with music underneath it. It happened more like a room slowly filling with light. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to be different. You just noticed, gradually, that the old reflexes weren't firing the same way. Someone said something that used to knock you sideways, and it didn't. Not because you hardened, because something underneath had shifted. The floor had changed texture. What used to land on open wound now landed on something quieter. Something that had learned how to receive without absorbing. You stopped explaining yourself to people who had already decided. That sentence sounds simple. It took years to earn. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from trying to be understood by someone who finds your clarity inconvenient. You can feel it in your jaw, in your shoulders, in the way you lie awake, reconstructing conversations in your head, searching for the version of your words that would finally make them see. What you eventually learn, through the kind of learning that cannot be rushed, is that the issue was never your words. The issue was the room. Some rooms are not built for honest sound. They are built for echo. And you cannot make a room hear you that was designed to redirect your voice. The shift wasn't bitterness. That is important to name. Bitterness looks like closing the door and standing behind it with your arms crossed, still thinking about the room, still narrating everything that happened there. What you moved into was different. It was more like walking through a threshold and simply being in a new place. Not because the old place didn't matter, but because you were no longer required to stay. You started trusting what you felt before you felt the need to justify it. That is not a small thing. For someone who is trained to outsource their own inner knowing, trained by experience, by the repeated message that their perceptions needed to be verified by someone else before they counted, that shift is tectonic. You felt something. And instead of immediately asking, "But am I right to feel this?" you stayed with it. You let it be information. You let it guide you before you let it be argued with. You stopped performing peace. There's a version of peace that is actually panic management. It looks calm from the outside. It's the smile you keep in place because a conflict would cost you more than the discomfort already has. It's the "it's fine" that you say before you've checked whether it actually is. That kind of peace is exhausting, It requires constant maintenance. It's not stillness, it's suppression with better posture. What you started finding was something different. Actual quiet. The kind that doesn't depend on the room staying still around you. The kind that doesn't require everyone to agree with you or behave correctly in order to hold its shape. You walked away from some things without announcing it. That confused people. They expected an exit with explanation, a speech, a reckoning. They expected you to want the last word. But you had already said everything that needed saying, in your own mind, in your own time. And you found that there was no version of the conversation that would give you what you were actually looking for. Because what you were looking for was no longer their validation. You were looking for your own. And you found it in the quiet. In the mornings, before anyone else was awake. In the moments when you chose your own company and found it was actually enough. In the way you started making decisions from the inside out instead of the outside in. Choosing things because they aligned with what you genuinely needed. Not because they would make the right impression on the right people. The old room still exists. Some of the people in it still talk about you. Some of them tell a version of your story you wouldn't recognize. And here is what you discovered. That's allowed. You don't need to go back and correct the record. You don't need to be in the room to defend yourself. The room isn't the truth. Your life is. You became someone who can sit with an unanswered question and not unravel. You became someone who can be misunderstood and not immediately try to fix it. You became someone who can watch a door close, slowly, the way important doors close, and feel something other than panic. Not nothing. You're not numb. You still feel all of it. But you feel it from a different place now. A place that has a floor. You did not become powerful because you learned how to fight louder. You became powerful because you learned when not to hand your peace to people who only knew how to misuse it. And the people who once needed you to over-explain, who needed you to be breathless and apologetic in order to feel safe around you. They don't know what to do with who you are now. Not because you've become cold, because you've become complete. There is a difference. This is what no one tells you about change. It doesn't always arrive with fanfare. The new chapter doesn't always begin with a dramatic moment where the world shifts and everyone acknowledges what you survived. Sometimes it begins on a quiet evening when you realize you have not thought about a certain person in days. Sometimes it begins in a conversation where you notice you didn't feel the need to shrink yourself to fit it. Sometimes it begins when someone offers you the old dynamic, the pull, the guilt, the familiar architecture of making yourself small, and your body just doesn't respond the way it used to. That non-response, that is not coldness. That is the evidence of everything you've done in the invisible places. Because growth that is real doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up as reaction time slowing. It shows up as the pause before you speak, where you check with yourself before you check with the room. It shows up as the ability to hear someone's disappointment in you without immediately taking it as instruction. You are not obligated to remain in your most wounded form so that others feel comfortable. You are not required to continue playing the role they cast you in just because they haven't auditioned anyone else. The new chapter does not look like what they expected from you. Some people in your life needed you to stay in the version they understood, the one who needed their validation, who leaned into their interpretation of events, who was a little off balance in ways that made them feel useful. When you stopped needing that from them, the relationship lost its shape. And what you have to understand is, that is their grief to hold, not yours to fix. You cannot shrink back into the room to ease someone else's confusion about why you left. And yet, and this matters, the new chapter is not built on resentment. If you carry this transformation as a weapon, you will wound yourself before you ever wound anyone else. Bitterness is a heavy thing. It costs more than whatever room it's directed at. The new chapter is not about proving you survived them. It is about living like someone who no longer needs that proof. There will be moments when the old pull comes back, a message that lands in a familiar tone, a person who reminds you of a dynamic you thought you'd walked free of, a situation that mirrors what used to break you. And in those moments, you'll feel the old impulse, the urge to explain, to justify, to give them enough of your interior world to satisfy their need for access. And then you'll remember, you don't live there anymore, not because you're above it, not because you've arrived somewhere so elevated that nothing touches you, because you've done the actual work, the unglamorous, uncelebrated, mostly invisible work of learning who you are when no one is validating it. And that version of you is not available for the old kind of lease. Some doors close slowly. Some relationships shift across months, not moments. Some of the people you love are still in rooms you've grown past, and grief is the honest response to that. You are allowed to love someone and still understand that the space you shared no longer serves either of you well. Grief is not the same as regret. You can grieve what a relationship was without wishing you had stayed in it longer. You are entering a season where your presence is the testimony. You don't have to announce what you've been through. You don't have to present your healing as evidence. You just have to keep living from the place you found in that quiet moment, the one that knew, the one that waited, the one that decided. The right people will recognize you immediately, not because you'll perform yourself for them, because you won't need to. Because for the first time in a long time, you will walk into a room as the full version of what you are, not the trimmed, curated, approval-seeking version. And the right people will feel it and move toward it, and the wrong people will feel it and move away. And you will learn to understand that movement in either direction as information rather than verdict. This is not the end of hard things. Hard things will still find you. But you have learned something that cannot be unlearned. You don't meet hard things the same way you used to. You don't dissolve into them. You don't explain your way out of them. You stand in them with all of your accumulated knowing, and you let yourself be exactly where you are. That is not performance. That is authority. So let this be said over your life with full intention. You are not who they described when you weren't in the room. You are not the label they gave you when they needed to make sense of your growth without crediting it. You are not the wound you were reduced to in moments when someone needed you to stay small. You are the one who sat in the silence and heard something true. You are the one who stopped explaining and started listening to yourself. You are the one who walked through the threshold, quietly, without a speech, without an audience. and found that on the other side was a version of your life that didn't require you to perform in order to earn your place in it. They don't recognize you. Let them wonder. Let them call it coldness if they need to. Let them tell the old story if it gives them something to hold. You are not in that story anymore. You are the one who chose peace over proof, the one who decided that your inner knowing was worth more than their approval, the one who finally stopped abandoning yourself just to be accepted by people who only love the version of you they could control. The new chapter does not begin with applause. It begins with this: a quiet, irreversible decision that the old room no longer owns you, and you've already made it. Welcome home. If something in this message found you, if a part of it felt less like content and more like confirmation, then you already know this space was made for you. Subscribe to the channel so the next download finds you when you need it. Because this isn't about building a following, it's about building a frequency. A place where people who've done the quiet work can come and know they're not alone in it. Drop a comment with the words that feel true for you right now. Even just one line. I choose peace over proof. The old room no longer owns me. I trust what I felt. I'm not explaining myself anymore. Whatever it is, leave it. Someone else scrolling through is going to read your words and feel less alone in their own shift. If you know someone who is in the middle of the hardest part, the part where they're still over-explaining, still trying to earn their right to be understood, share this with them quietly, not as advice, just as company. Take care of yourself and trust the knowing. God bless you.